So the factors in attraction, right? Why is it that we like and love other people? So the most important thing, at least at the beginning, is physical attractiveness, right? Most of us wouldn't want to say that because it sounds shallow, but it is the first thing that you notice about someone, right? It is usually what people are attracted to, what they look like. So then those who are considered more physically attractive are more successful in having relationships, right? They tend to be able to have more relationships, right? Now, the matching hypothesis is the idea that people date those who are equally physically as attractive as them, right? So then more attractive people are more selective, right? Because supposedly, right, there's less conventionally attractive people, so they're more selective in who they will date. Now, similarity, right? Opposites do not actually attract, right? People who tend to get together tend to have a lot more in common than a lot that they don't have in common. Okay, so the whole opposites attract is a cute movie thing, but it's not really a reality thing. And then a lot of this also happens because of reciprocity. So you become more similar the more time that you spend with each other. And this is called attitude alignment, right? So you modify some of your attitudes in order to be more similar, right? So not like any of your core beliefs, but you may change a couple of your opinions in order to get along better with your partner. So now, from the evolutionary perspective, right, it's based on mating priorities, because in the evolutionary perspective, it believes that our only purpose is to procreate, have children, and pass our genes along. So men prefer younger and prettier women because they have better reproductive potential. They're younger, they're more likely to be able to have kids and survive having kids. Okay, whereas women care more about ambition, social status, and finances, because that indicates that, you know, the male has resources and they're more likely to invest in the child, and it makes the child more likely to survive. Now, Buss came up with the theory of mate poaching to try to explain why people in relationships are more appealing than people who are single, right, to other single people. So this is basically the idea that someone in a relationship has the resources, right, to be in a relationship. So a single person is more likely to go after someone who's in a relationship because they're guaranteed that that person will have what they need, versus trying to find a single person that has, you know, relationship material, right? Obviously, this is not condoning it, but this is their explanation as to why that happens. So now the internet has allowed people to meet a lot more easily than they did in the past, right? Before the internet, you had to meet someone in person, whether it was by chance when you're out and about living your life, or through work, friends, or hobbies, right, or family. So you had to happen to meet them or have someone connect you with them, right? And then you had to meet in person. Now over the internet, it's a lot easier to meet people online, to speak online, right, before you actually meet in person. And then certain websites have these algorithms that can match people based on answers that they give on questionnaires about things that are important to them, future goals they have, ambitions, and all that stuff. So it makes it a lot easier to find someone that you're actually going to possibly get along with versus just doing it by chance, right, where that is a lot more trial and error. Now, comparing passionate and companionate love. You also see companionate written as compassionate, so just be aware you can see it either way. So passionate love is very sexual, very physical, right? The highs and lows of emotion, so you have both extremes of, you know, a lot of happiness, but also a lot of sadness, right? So it's very much like the honeymoon phase of a relationship, right? So it's very intense, almost obsession, right? Versus companionate love is what comes later on, right? It's more based on trust, affection, right? And those who have companionate love tend to have better relationship satisfaction over time, right? Now, Hazen and Shaver viewed that we formed our relationships as similar to the attachments that we had as children, right? When we talked about Ainsworth back in the development chapter. So if you formed an anxious attachment with your caregiver, then in your romantic relationships, you tend to be more jealous, right? You're more insecure because you expect that the person you're with is going to reject you or leave you, and that makes you more prone to fighting, right? You need more reassurance that they want to be with you. Whereas if you created an avoidant attachment, right, it's difficult to get close to others, right? You have a hard time trusting and having intimacy with others. So again, you have the same attachment that you had as a child. Now, Sternberg believed that a successful, ultimately successful relationship has intimacy, commitment, and passion. Right? So intimacy is talking about feeling close and connected with someone. So not necessarily physically close, but, you know, that feeling of trust that you can confide in them. commitment is, wanting to be with that one person, right? Deciding to commit to that person and wanting to have the same goals and reach the same, markers with each other. And then passion is more of the physical, right? The feelings, the desires, romance, and the sexual part of the relationship, right? So on the right, you can see a nice little triangle where they show you all the three components, and then how they can combine with one other component, and then all together, they're called consummate love. So attitudes and how we can change them. So an attitude is basically your opinion on an idea, whether it's positive or negative. So there's three components to an attitude. The cognitive component is the thoughts and beliefs that you have, right? The affective component is how you feel about it, and the behavioral component is what you do because of it, right? The actions you take, okay? Explicit attitudes are things that you are aware of and that you can describe, right? So for example, I absolutely hate raw tomatoes. I will not eat one if I don't absolutely have to. Even if I have to, I won't do it. An implicit attitude is something that is more of an automatic response, right? So you don't really have a lot of conscious control over these things. And this tends to lead to prejudices, right? And some prejudices we're not even aware that we have, because they're so prevalent in society, right? You're exposed to them from a very young age, right? The messages are everywhere, and you don't realize that you internalize them, and then that can affect some of your behaviors, right? And there are some tests that you could take, right? I think they're called implicit attitude tests. They're IATs. No, implicit association tests, right? So you can take one of those tests, and it will show you any implicit attitudes that you might have, right? Positive or negative. Here's an example of a breakdown of someone's attitude on gun control, right? So the cognitive component, remember what they think, right? So their thought is gun owners end up shooting themselves more than they shoot thieves, right? So that's their opinion, right? The affective component is the emotions that they feel, right? Guns make them feel sick, right? The behavioral component is in the actions that they take. So they vote for gun control advocates whenever they can. They go protest, right? So the actions that they take based on their attitude. So ways in which attitudes can be changed, right? So the source, message, channel, and receiver are all going to have an influence on whether or not an attitude is going to be changed. The source is the person who's saying the message, right? So they are more convincing if they are an expert, if they seem like you can trust them, if they're likable, attractive, right? All those things can make the person more convincing. Now the message is the information, right? So someone whose message includes both sides of an argument is going to seem more credible, right? It's going to look like they did their research. It's going to look like they know what they're talking about. So it's going to be more convincing in that sense. Repetition makes something seem true. So the more someone says something, the more they repeat the message, the more likely it is that you're going to believe it, right? So this is why rumors happen, right? People believe because they've heard it from so many different people that it has to be true. And then fear is very convincing, right? Using fear as a tactic, right? We respond very quickly and very readily to fear. So we're easily convinced when we're told that we should be afraid of something. Okay? So the channel is just the way that the message is sent, right? Whether it's online, TV, in person, through newspaper, through radio, right? Just how it's sent. Okay? And then the receiver is the person who's getting the message, right? The audience. And then some people are just easier to convince than others. Okay? So people with strong opinions, their opinions tend to get stronger if the message agrees with what they think, right? But those people are a lot harder to convince if you're trying to convince them of the opposite, right? Whereas people who are more in the middle, they're a little bit easier to tip to one end or the other. So some of the theories on attitude change. The first is learning theory, right? And this goes back to classical conditioning, right? And we looked at this when we studied advertising in the behaviorism chapter, right? So when you put likable and popular people with products, it makes you associate the product with a good thing, right? Because you feel good and you like the actor, for example, you're going to assume that the product is good and that you're going to like it. So it makes it more likely that you're going to buy it, okay? Now, dissonance theory is when your attitudes don't match up with your behaviors, right? So you do something, it doesn't really go with what you believe, so then you change what you believe in order to justify the behavior, because you can't go back and undo the behavior. So you change your attitudes, right? So this was based on the experiment that they did where they had people do something very, very boring, and then they had to convince the next person that was coming in that it was a very exciting task. Some people were given $1, some people were given $20. The people given $20, their attitude about the experiment did not change. They thought it was boring before and after they convinced that person. The people who were only given $1 right, they later changed their attitude. At first they thought it was very, very boring. After they lied to someone for $1, they said, actually, it was actually pretty fun. It wasn't that bad. Okay, so they thought, the people with the $1, right, they realized that, why am I lying for $1? Who actually lies for $1? It's not really worth it. So they had to then change their attitude because they already lied. The behavior was lying. So they had to go back, change their attitude, and say that it actually was fun. I wasn't really lying. Okay, and then part of this is related to the self-perception theory, right, where sometimes we infer what our attitude is based on our behavior, right? So take, for example, in politics, someone who always votes for people of a specific party might infer that they hate the other party, when in reality, it's just that the candidates that they have voted for in the past, had a lot of policies that they agreed with. Okay, but they could infer, maybe incorrectly, that they are just against everything that the other party stands for, right, based on their behavior of never voting for the other party. Okay, so now the elaboration likelihood model is how likely are you to change your attitude and how likely that attitude is going to be long-lasting, right, a permanent change. So when someone takes a central route, okay, so this means that they're taking a more logical route. They spend more time thinking about the message, what's in the message, right, how valid the message is. Okay, so it's more analytical and it's more likely to result in a permanent change in behavior. Okay, so now the peripheral route is when you focus on things that are not related to the message. So who's giving the message, right, how attractive they might be, if you feel emotional, right, if there's an emotional appeal. Okay, so they may change their minds in the moment, but it won't be long lasting, right, because they didn't really focus on what the actual message was. Okay, so it will change, but not permanently. So here you can see the visual of the cognitive dissonance theory for the experiment of the $1 and $20 people lying about whether or not the experiment was going to be fun. Right, so for the control group that was given $20, right, they rationalized that $20 is enough money for me to lie about something, so they didn't change their attitude, right? They still believe what they believed, they could justify the fact that they lied, right? Versus the experimental group that was only giving $1, right? They're thinking, why would I lie for $1, right? So I must have thought the experiment actually was good if that's what I was saying to this other person. Okay, so they changed their attitude based on the fact that they had higher cognitive dissonance than the people who were given $20 and could rationalize their lying. So now this is the visual for the central and peripheral routes. So remember, the central route, you're focusing on the actual message, how logical, reasonable it is, right? Analyzing the actual material, paying attention to what's being said, right? So this will lead to a more long-lasting change versus the peripheral route, where you look at just attractiveness, how credible they are, do you feel anything after this? Right, so you're not actually paying attention to what the message says, and therefore you have a less durable attitude change.